AskReddit by sheer king hubris. The road to hell was paved with good intentions. What moment in history does this quote ring true? The Chinese anti-sparrow campaign that was part of the Four Pests campaign. From 1958 to 1960, people were asked to kill as many sparrows as possible, so that there would be more grain for the masses because sparrows wouldn't eat so much before it was harvested. The problem was, sparrows were important for keeping locusts in check, so in the following years there were huge swarms of locusts that decimated grain crops. This was one of the reasons for the mass starvation in the years of the Great Leap Forward. In a similar vein, the fate of the passenger pigeon. Both can be attributed to an immature notion of nature. Pushing margarine to reduced saturated fat intake, from butter, only to realize trans fats are awful for you. That was also partly due to a belief that plant fats were healthy because they came from plants, and animal fats were unhealthy because they came from animals. Eli Whitney wanted to decrease the demand for slavery in late 18th century America with his invention of the cotton gin. He hoped that the efficiency of the machine would drive down labor and eventually lead to the end of slavery altogether. Instead, it revitalized slavery for another 70 years, leading right up to the Civil War. Good thing he just patented it, and not invented. When armchair detectives of Reddit misidentified the Boston Marathon bombers. We did it, Reddit. Whoever said that is probably out there somewhere. The Cobra effect. In India, the British put a bounty on cobras to fight against deaths by snake bites. People started to raise them to sell. The British dropped the bounty and the snake ranchers just let them go. More deaths by cobras than ever. US did the same thing in Yemen under Obama to get them to sell a lot of their privately owned guns. It backfired really hard and created a small arms manufacturing business in Yemen and Somalia. Bringing cane toads to Australia. And rabbits, foxes, blackberries, etc. Improving the octane levels in early gas, leading to major improvements in early automobiles, and moving countries away from horse-based transport with all the manure and animal abuse often tied to it. Except they used lead. The single biggest mistake in quite a while. The crime rate drop around the time lead was prohibited in gas is pretty amazing. Thomas Midgley Jr. is the man credited with developing leaded petrol gasoline. He went on to come up with CFCs, thus ensuring a well-paved road to eternal damnation. Dudes who invented thalidomide. Also, telling weaning mothers to avoid their kids having peanut was a pretty bad own goal. The environmentalists' movement against nuclear power without clean alternatives, leading to more coal and natural gas power plants. A lot of the anti-nuclear lobbying was also funded by the oil and gas lobby. Don't know if anyone has posted this, but strangely enough lobotomies were intended to be an alternative to keeping people in asylums for the rest of their lives, as when it was invented drug therapy wasn't quite there yet and most therapy was a padded self or TGE rest of your life. Of course, lobotomies didn't actually cure the mental illness, it mostly made the recipient quiet and docile enough they could rot away in some side room for decades. This then became worse as it became more popular, being used to treat badly behaved children or easily excitable and hysteric prone persons. Women. The word you're looking for is women. Eugenics was once seen as a noble cause. Well, it is just animal husbandry. How often have you heard you two are going to have beautiful children? It's just when it gets forced and taken to an extreme that people take issue. France's condemnation of the Italian invasion of Abyssinia. Contrary to what some may think, Italy and France had a decent relationship in the early 30s, and Mussolini wasn't always the biggest fan of Hitler. When Hitler first tried to annex Austria, Italy stood in his way. France and Italy had a sort of agreement that they didn't want Germany annexing Austria even if the treaty already said it was illegal. France had spent the interwar period creating a ring of allies around Germany, and all seemed well even with Hitler gaining power. That was until the Abyssinia crisis, in which despite basically doing nothing, the League's condemnation isolated Italy. Feeling betrayed by France as there had been some non-binding assurances by the former to his invasion, it led to Mussolini growing closer to Hitler. This, in turn, cracked the ring of alliances surrounding Germany right down the mid. Now Hitler still could have been stopped, mostly by Britain actually supporting France in upholding the treaty from 36-38, but one of the first dominoes to fall after Austria was a direct consequence of France alienating Italy. Federally funded student loans in the US. They created a huge amount of money for colleges and a huge increase in demand for colleges. This led to catastrophic cost increases and a great deal of poor decision making on the part of students. Also, the fact that you cannot get out of student debt by declaring bankruptcy is ludicrous. Prohibition. Alcoholism was a serious problem affecting the United States at the time, and it was indeed a gendered issue given the relationship between alcoholism and domestic violence. Of course, it just ended up leading to the growth of organized crime, violence, and oddly enough more alcoholism. I'd have to look further into it, but at least in modern day alcoholism is not as severe. I remember hearing the average man in pre-prohibition America was going through something ridiculous like a handle of whiskey a day. Stuff is stronger nowadays, but I don't think the average person is getting close to that anymore. The famous peace in our time policy of appeasing Hitler and thus preventing war by giving Germany the Sudetenland just prior to WWII. And giving the UK some time to prepare for war. Because at the time it wasn't. Fritz Haber, the inventor of a process for synthesizing ammonia. He pulled billions out of starvation by leading the way for modern industrial farming. His process was also used for synthesizing chlorine gas, which was used to kill millions. His wife committed suicide shortly after the first chlorine bombs started being used. His first wife, and she used Fritz's army-issued revolver to do it, in the front garden of their home. Shot herself through the heart in the front garden of their home. Lived just long enough for their son to come find her. The real kick in the teeth is what happened to his granddaughter Claire, Ike, in the aftermath of WW2. Her work on a more effective counter for chlorine gas exposure was shitcanned because the brass wanted to focus more on nukes. Haber-Bosch, the Great Alliance. Where's the contradiction? Almost every cause, very few people ever thought themselves the baddies. Our hats hands, why do they have skulls? Tsar Nicholas I mobilizing Russia's army in 1914. He did it reluctantly, at the insistence of his generals that they had to be ready to protect Serbia if Austria attacked. He didn't want war with Germany, and was actively advocating as such in telegrams with Wilhelm II even as his army was mobilizing. But by mobilizing at all he forced Germany to mobilize, and Germany couldn't do that without sucker punching Belgium on its way to France. Honestly, most of what started WW1 was a whole bunch of people trying to do their best who couldn't overcome the inertia of imperial bureaucracy and entrenched military elites to stop the war. Deleted. More arrogance than altruism. The Russian Revolution. They wanted freedom and equality, but Stalin became a dictator and ruined it all. The germ of state-sponsored violence was inherent in the Bolshevik Party from the start. One of the first things Lenin did after coming to power in October 1917 was to ban all opposition papers and imprison the cadet deputies elected to the Constituent Assembly. In December 1917, 2 months after taking power, Lenin established the Cheka, which was the precursor to the NKVD that under Stalin enforced the Great Purge. The Cheka then proceeded to institute the Red Terror, indiscriminately imprisoning, torturing, and killing prisoners without trial. Lenin was instrumental in giving Cheka the authority to execute prisoners without trial. Lenin sent food detachments to the countryside to forcibly requisition grain from peasants, often violently, glorified violent language and praised the extermination of vermin, his enemies, and started the civil war to hasten the destruction of his enemies and to consolidate his power. Stalin merely perfected and expanded the terror state he inherited from Lenin. Appeasement towards Germany in the early and mid-30s. I raise you the Treaty of Versailles. The French Revolution. Specifically the Second French Revolution of the 10th of August, 1792, which brought about the First French Republic, the September C%20 during %20 the %20 French %20 Revolution, the Committee of Public Safety, the Infernal Columns, https://en.m.wiki.org/infernal_column / Republican baptisms. https://en.m.wiki.org/wiki/drownings_at_nont and of course the Reign of Terror. All in the name of liberté, égalité, fraternité. This Maximilien Robespierre's entire foray into politics was based on the most breathtaking noble of intentions. All of the French revolutionaries were young men, and the occasional very brave woman, with supreme idealism and visions of a better and egalitarian world in their minds. The path to the terror was very much paved with good intentions. Letting China in the World Trade Organization, we thought that by doing that they'll become more democratic. People confusing public justifications with good intentions. People don't like to believe that good people who mean well can end up doing terrible things. So they retcon the motivations to make them bad all along. But that's not how it works. Margaret Thatcher privatizing much of the industry as it would encourage competition, which would lead to lower pricing. Only problem now is many of the CSN companies realized that everyone needs the essentials and so jacked up the pricing of goods and services and have created a cost of living crisis and worse living standards since WW2.